Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying Volume 4, which is titled Exploring the Path to Enlightenment. We're finishing up this book today. We're going to be exploring chapters 21 through 31, and then next week we're going to be in Volume 5, which is the first stage of enlightenment. And we're going to be in that book for a while because there's a fair number of chapters there. And that's the teachings that you need to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment. So welcome to all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. The way that we do this program is I invite anyone in Zoom to be able to read a chapter. After someone reads, I will share some teachings on that, and then I'll open up to any and all questions that you guys have. If you're interested in asking a question, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section. I'll be able to see that. Or if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any and all questions that you like. And for those of you guys that are in Zoom, you guys know that you can volunteer to read by just electronically raising your hand. So is there anybody who would like to read this first chapter, 21? Okay, it looks like Marcy volunteered. So go ahead, Marcy.
Thank you, Teacher David. Awaiting his time, mindful and clearly comprehending. Monks. A monk should await his time, mindful and clearly comprehending. This is my instruction to you. And how, monks, is a monk mindful? Here, monks. A monk resides reflecting on body as body, dedicated, clearly comprehending, mindful, having put away craving and displeasure in regard to the world. He resides reflecting on feelings as feelings, mind as mind, mental object as mental objects, dedicated, clearly comprehending, mindful, having put away craving and displeasure in regard to the world. It is in such a way that a monk is mindful. And how monks does a monk exercise clear comprehension? Here, monks, a monk is one who acts with clear comprehension when going and returning, when looking ahead, looking aside, when drawing in and extending the limbs, when wearing his robe and carrying his outer robe and bowl, when eating, drinking, chewing his food and tasting, when defecating and urinating, when walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, speaking, and keeping silent. It is in such a way that a monk exercises clear comprehension. A monk should always await his time, mindful and clearly comprehending. This is my instruction to you. Monks, while a monk resides thus, mindful and clearly comprehending, diligent, dedicated, and determined, if there arises in him a pleasant feeling, he understands thus: there has arisen in me a pleasant feeling. Now that is dependent, not independent. Dependent on what? Dependent on this very body. But this body is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen. So when the pleasant feeling has arisen in dependency on a body that is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, how could it be permanent? He resides reflecting on impermanence in the body and in pleasant feelings. He resides reflecting on vanishing, reflecting on fading away, reflecting on elimination, reflecting on letting go. As he resides thus, the underlying tendency to crave in regard to the body and in regard to pleasant feelings is abandoned by him. If he feels pleasant feelings, he understands it is impermanent. He understands it. He is not held to it. He understands it. He is not excited in it. If he feels painful feelings, he understands it. It is impermanent. He understands it. It is not it is not held to, he understands it, it is not excited in. If he feels neither painful nor pleasant feelings, he understands it is impermanent. He understands it is not held to. He understands it is not excited in. If he feels a pleasant feeling, he feels it without holding on to it. If he feels a painful feeling, he feels it without holding on to it. If he feels neither a painful nor pleasant feeling, he feels it without holding on to it. When he feels a feeling terminating with the body, he understands. I feel a feeling terminating with the body. When he feels a feeling terminating with life, he understands. I feel a feeling terminating with life. He understands. With the breakup of the body, following the exhaustion of life, all that is felt, not being excited in, will become cool right there. Just as monks, an oil lamp burns in dependence on the oil and the wick. With the exhaustion of the oil and the wick, it is extinguished through lack of fuel. So too monks. When a monk feels a feeling terminating with the body, terminating with life, he understands. With the breakup of the body, following the exhaustion of life, all that is felt, not being excited in, will become cool right here.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So here the Buddha is giving guidance on right mindfulness and right concentration. If you guys remember back to when I teach the Eightfold Path, I share with you that the Buddha teaches about right concentration in other parts of his teachings. Oftentimes he's teaching about mindfulness and concentration together, because when the mind is calm, you can have mindfulness and awareness of mind. And then when you have awareness of mind, you have concentration. And when you have concentration, you have wisdom. You are able to access your wisdom and make wise decisions. Where conversely, if you didn't have that, if your mind was all shaken up, it was uncalm, you don't have mindfulness or awareness of mind, you don't have concentration or focus, and then you can't access your wisdom, and now you're making unwise decisions that's going to produce unwholesome results. Remember, your ultimate goal is to extinguish all unwise decisions, because that's what's producing unwholesome karma. You would like to get to the point where you're only making wise decisions and it's only producing wholesome karma for you. When you're mindful, you can make these wise decisions, right? So that's why the Buddha is talking about mindfulness and concentration together, is that you need to be able to have a calm mind so you can have mindfulness or awareness of mind, concentration, and access your wisdom. Because if you keep making unwise decisions in the world, this is all just going to come back and be able to experience these unwholesome results. You need to get to the point where you've extinguished every single aspect of your unwholesome karma. And part of that unwholesome karma is that the mind is not trained, so therefore it's going to keep being stuck in this continuous cycle of making unwise decisions. So you guys, if you've studied the Eightfold Path, you've seen this part about right mindfulness before. This is what's in the Eightfold Path. But then he's going on here, and he talks in other discourses as well, where he's discussing the concentration. Here it's being referred to as clear comprehension. What he's essentially talking about, in which he says directly in other discourses, is practicing singleness of mind. That if you're going to be doing something, just do one thing at a time. That's what's going to promote the concentration in your mind. Of course, the breathing mindfulness meditation does that. That's going to help to hone your mind, developing mindfulness and concentration. But then in daily life, you need to be practicing singleness of mind. And here he's giving examples for a monk, that a monk's going to be doing these things. But we could say, a student exercises clear comprehension. They act with clear comprehension when going to work, when returning home from work, when sitting in a business meeting, when leaving the business meeting, when choosing to urinate or defecate, all these things that the Buddha is talking about here, a lot of these apply to you too. So he's just giving examples of singleness of mind here. And in other discourses, he specifically talks about singleness of mind, but here he's just giving examples of it. And then he gets down to the point where he's saying, okay, that if you're residing mindful and you're residing with clear comprehension, which is concentration, and the mind's dedicated and diligent and determined, now when there's a pleasant feeling that's arising, then you know that this feeling is arising. And now you know that it's dependent on craving, desire, attachment. It's dependent on contact, that when you have contact through the six sense bases, if there's a craving in the mind, now it's going to experience this conditioned feeling. And this is an impermanent feeling because it's arising, it's changing, and it's fading away. But yet the mind craves permanence. So when you can understand that there's this tendency to crave and the mind wants to long and yearn for this permanence, but yet what you're doing instead is you're reflecting on the impermanent nature of these things, and that when this pleasant feeling is starting to arise, you apply right effort to let go, let go, let go. Then you can get to the point where this underlying tendency to crave can be abandoned from the mind. That's what you need to be able to see, that truth right there, that the mind is craving these pleasant feelings. If it gets what it wants, it gets those pleasant feelings. If it doesn't get what it wants, it gets the painful feelings. When it experiences some kind of contact through the six sense bases, if there's a craving in the mind and it's getting what it wants, it gets those pleasant feelings, and if it doesn't, it gets the painful ones. But if you can notice it as a bodily sensation with your mindfulness, then you can cut it off and let it go, and cut it off and let it go. And that's what the Buddha is getting to here, that if you feel a pleasant feeling, painful feeling, or neither painful nor pleasant, you understand that it's impermanent, that you don't hold on to it, you don't excite in it, and you let it go. And now, having let go, more and more, as you're cutting off and letting go as a bodily sensation, this is where the Buddha is saying, okay, you're exhausting that craving, you're terminating it, you're eliminating it at the body, because that's the bodily sensation. And now, if you do that more and more and more and more and more, that's what's going to lead to enlightenment. When you see the Buddha talking about, we'll become cool right here, this is extinguishing those three fires of craving, anger, and ignorance. You're extinguishing the causes and conditions that lead to these discontent feelings. Because when you're angry and you're hostile and you're bitter, you're not cool, right? You're not calm. So that's what the Buddha is describing, is that if you can cut off and let go at the bodily sensations, then you can eliminate the causes and conditions, and you can be calm and steady and tranquil and serene. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this one. This is chapter 21 of volume 4. Marcy, do you have a question, or was that up from before?
I do have a question, Teacher David. Thank you. I have noticed now that the mind is noticing contact. I will, either during meditation, or if, I'm cooking or something, for an example, my cat will rub up against my leg and the mind will be saying, there's contact. That's a bodily contact. That's a physical contact. And then I just kind of don't even. Where before, if I had contact from one of my animals, I would get a bodily sensation. I would get either that ooh, goochie, goochie, goo, sweet, sweet, your baby feeling. But now it's just, the mind just says, it's contact. It's just bodily contact. It's ear, sound contact. I didn't know if that was something that was normal in the process of this path, if that with the mind would then, dissipate on bodily sensations and just kind of more recognize as contact and not even get a bodily sensation.
Yeah, that's what you'll do in order to, you'll see in a discourse here in a moment where the Buddha says that when you're experiencing contact through the six sense bases, you're going to see it differently when you understand that it's impermanent. You're going to see it differently, and now you're going to respond to it differently. Where right now, you're just, okay, that's bodily contact, no big deal. And now, when you go through that for a period of time and your mind is more trained and your central desire is eliminated, eventually you can do things like, oh, hey baby, how are you? What's up? What's happening? Would you like mommy to get you some food? Is that what you'd like? Right? You can do those kinds of things. There's no harm in that, but you just got to be observant of the mind that there's not a conditioned pleasant feeling there. So what you're doing now is it's like the mind is transitioning away from these central desires and these conditioned feelings, but but eventually you'll be able to come into your own, where now you'll be able to have that warmth and that love and that thinking like that, and maybe even communicating like that, but there's no conditioned pleasant feeling in the mind. But you do go through this period that you're describing where you just see things as contact, and you're not excited about it, you're not experiencing sadness or anger about it, it's just contact. And then ultimately, as you move past sensual desire, you'll be able to see that you'll be able to, have fun and enjoy and even say some warm words, but there's just no conditioned feelings in the mind.
Thank you, Teacher David.
You're welcome. Let me see what we have in Facebook or YouTube. Looks like Yihang has a question as well. So go ahead, Yihang.
Thank you, Teacher David. I was recently feeling like a bodily sensation of a feeling of being very touched, and especially happening when I read something like very touched stories or watch some very emotional videos. And that was like going on, I feel like around the skull, but I feel it's a bodily sensation. I feel it's kind of comfortable and healing. And then it goes through a couple of seconds, and then it will slowly fade away. And I don't know if I should really quickly just cut it off when it suddenly arises, because I feel like I kind of enjoy the whole changing periods when it rises and it's there, a little bit like massaging on the scalp, and then when it fades away also. And when it fades away, when it's going out, I'll notice that now this feeling is or this sensation is going out, it's gone, and I don't feel that much of hold on to that. But in terms of exercising on the path, should I still try to cut it off as quick as possible?
Yes, because what you're doing there is you're kind of welcoming it into the mind, and it's like, that feels good. But the next thing you know, it's going to become a conditioned feeling. And you got to get to the point where if you're really interested in this permanent peace and the permanent joy, you've got to not indulge in that and just cut that off. And this is where it becomes very challenging, because it's like, wow, that feels so good. I like that. But you got to understand that ultimately is going to lead to a painful feeling. And you're not interested in that, because this impermanent pleasant feeling, it's going to arise, change, and fade away. And you would like to get past those, where now you can experience the permanent joy and the permanent peace and the permanent happiness. But if you allow the mind to just indulge in it and not take action to cut it off, then the mind, according to the way that the Buddha teaches, is that it's complacent. That if you allow an unwholesome thought or unwholesome thing to come into the mind, and conditioned pleasant feelings are unwholesome. So you would like to be able to see it that way, because that conditioned pleasant feeling is still based on craving, desire, attachment. And now cut that off and let it go, so you don't allow the mind to be complacent. And that's going to allow you to ultimately get to this unconditioned happiness, where your mind can just always be happy.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere else. So I'm going to move on to the next one, which is chapter 22. Looks like Pat has his hand up to read, as well as Yihang. So we'll take Pat first and raise his hand first, and then Yihang, you can take the next one.
Thank you. Nothing is worth adhering to. Then a certain monk approached the perfectly enlightened one and said to him, "Venerable sir, is there one thing through the abandoning of which ignorance is abandoned by a monk and true wisdom arises?" There is one thing, monk, through the abandoning of which ignorance is abandoned by a monk and true wisdom arises. And what is that one thing, venerable sir? Ignorance, monk, is that one thing through the abandoning of which ignorance is abandoned by a monk and true wisdom arises. But, venerable sir, how should a monk know? How should he see? For ignorance to be abandoned by him and true wisdom to arise. Here, monk, a monk is heard. Nothing is worth adhering to. When a monk is heard, nothing is worth adhering to, he directly knows everything. Having directly known everything, he fully understands everything. Having fully understood everything, he sees all signs differently. He sees the eye differently. He sees forms differently. He sees eye consciousness differently. He sees eye contact differently. And whatever feeling arises with eye contact as condition, experiencing pleasure, pain, or neither painful nor pleasant, that too he sees differently. He sees the ear differently. He sees sound differently. He sees ear consciousness differently. He sees ear contact differently. And whatever feeling arises with ear contact as condition, experiencing pleasure, pain, or neither painful nor pleasant, that too he sees differently. He sees the nose differently. He sees odors differently. He sees nose consciousness differently. He sees nose contact differently. And whatever feeling arises with nose contact as condition, experiencing pleasure, pain, or as neither painful nor pleasant, that too he sees differently. He sees the tongue differently. He sees flavors differently. He sees tongue consciousness differently. He sees tongue contact differently. And whatever feeling arises with tongue contact as condition, experiencing pleasure, pain, or as neither painful nor pleasant, that too he sees differently. He sees the body differently. He sees physical objects differently. He sees body consciousness differently. He sees body contact differently. And whatever feeling arises with body contact as condition, experiencing pleasure, pain, or as neither painful nor pleasant, that too he sees differently. He sees the mind differently. He sees mental objects differently. He sees mind consciousness differently. He sees mind contact differently. And whatever feeling arises with mind contact as condition, experiencing pain, experiencing pleasure, pain, or as neither painful nor pleasant, that too he sees differently. When a monk knows and sees thus, ignorance is abandoned by him and true wisdom arises. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So here, his students asking him, how do you essentially get rid of this ignorance? What is it, that one thing that you can let go of to eliminate the ignorance? And the Buddha says, well, ignorance, letting go of ignorance is what will eliminate ignorance. And the way that you do that is by cultivation of wisdom. That's why you've always been guided to never believe any of the teachings, even though you might not have understood this however long it was ago that you first started learning. I understood that. So I've been guiding you all the way along to never believe anything and make sure that you're arising wisdom by learning, investigating, and examining teachings, reflecting on them to independently verify them and practice them. That's what's going to lead to your enlightenment. And through cultivating this wisdom, now the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality of what's really happening in this world can be eliminated. And as you do that, then what you ultimately get to is you realize that nothing is worth adhering to. Not your mom, not your dad, not your brother, not your sister, not your children, not your clothes, not your money. None of this is worth adhering to, meaning holding on, because you can understand through wisdom that as soon as you hold on to something, it's going to change, and then you're going to experience the painful feelings. And if you're not interested in experiencing those painful feelings, you would need to understand the impermanent nature of all these things, and that the mind's holding on and be disinterested in doing that. Just like when you walk down the beach and you kick up sand and it blows back in your face, I'm not interested in doing that anymore because that doesn't feel very nice. The same thing is true that when you're experiencing those painful feelings, it's like, that doesn't really feel very nice. Well, if you understand the cause of that is the craving for permanence and holding on to these things, then you get to the point where you're like, nothing's really worth holding on to. Sure, I'll have this phone and I'll use it, but I'm not going to cling to it because it's not permanent. Sure, I'm going to have this car and use it, but it's not worth adhering to, meaning craving for it to be permanent. So there's going to be certain material possessions that you have in your day-to-day life, but you're not interested in clinging to them. And as you've learned this, and as you start to see this, then you start looking at things differently. This is what we were just talking about, Yihang, that when those pleasant feelings are arising and you're noticing those bodily sensations, you need to look at it differently. You need to be able to look at it like, if I don't cut this off, it's going to lead to painful feelings. So let me do that. Where before we might have, with a lack of wisdom, we might have indulged in those pleasant feelings. So now we start looking at things differently. And the Buddha goes through all the 6 sense bases, because anytime you experience discontentedness, it's coming through one of those 6 sense bases. So the Buddha is saying you see the eye differently. You understand it's impermanent. You see the physical forms that the eye sees, like this phone or this computer or any number of other physical forms. You see them differently. You know that they're impermanent. And then there's this eye consciousness. What that is when the eye and the form come together and now the mind becomes aware of it. That's called eye consciousness. And now these three things are referred to as eye contact. So when you have the internal sense base of the eye, the external sense base of the form, and now the mind becomes aware of that eye consciousness, you now have contact. And now when there's contact, whatever feeling arises, whether it's pleasure, pain, or neither painful nor pleasant, you see that differently. Where before you might have been longing, yearning for those pleasant feelings to continue, now you're like, no. I have more wisdom now. I know to cut that off. And that's what the Buddha is saying, is to get rid of this ignorance, you got to arise this wisdom. And once you arise this wisdom, you're going to see contact through any of these sense bases completely different. And that's what you would ultimately like to be able to get to. And then ultimately, having done that, the Buddha says, okay, having abandoned this ignorance, now there's this true wisdom that you see things differently through these 6 sense bases. So any questions here on this chapter? Okay, I don't see any questions. So this next one, I think it was Yihang that was interested in reading it. Yihang, this one's very similar to the one we just read. So if you'd like, you can just kind of like read this first part, and then from there we can just skip over, because it's essentially the same thing. It's just adding impermanent rather than differently.
Okay, sure. Knowing and seeing as impermanent. Then a certain monk approached the perfectly enlightened one and said to him, "Venerable sir, is there one thing through the abandoning of which ignorance, knowing of true reality, is abandoned by a monk and true wisdom arises?" Monk, when a monk knows and sees the eye as impermanent, ignorance, knowing of true reality, is abandoned by him, and true wisdom arises. When he knows and sees forms as impermanent, when he knows and sees as impermanent, whatever feeling arises with eye contact as condition, ignorance is abandoned by him, and true wisdom arises.
So now it's just ear, nose, tongue, body, and then mind, and then it's the same exact thing at the end here.
And should I read the end sentence?
Sure. This one here.
When a monk knows and sees thus, ignorance, unknowing of true reality, is abandoned by him, and true wisdom arises. That's easy.
Yeah, you can read the next one too if you like. We have plenty today. We have 11 chapters. So I was just talking about this in the previous one, that the reason why the mind sees all those things differently, which is what the Buddha was talking about before, it's because you understand impermanence. If you understand the universal truth of impermanence and you have that wisdom, then now you're going to see those things differently. So that's what he's talking about here, is that because of impermanence, you're going to see all these things differently. These two discourses together can help you understand that. So I suspect you guys don't have questions here. So let's go to the next one. Yihang, would you like to read this one?
Thank you. Direct knowledge for a sick one. Monks, if 5 things do not slip away from a weak and sick monk, it can be predicted of him in no long time with the destruction of the tents. He will realize for himself with direct knowledge, experience, in this very life, the tentless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, and having entered upon it, he will reside in it. What 5? Here, a monk resides reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food, perceiving on non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects, and he has the perception of death well established internally. If these 5 things do not slip away from a weak and sick monk, it can be predicted of him in no long time with the destruction of the tents. He will realize for himself with direct knowledge, experience, in this very life, the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, and having entered upon it, he will reside in it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yihang. So here the Buddha is sharing this discourse about someone who's sick and weak and maybe close to death, and is saying these are the 5 things that would be wise for somebody to remember. But these are also 5 things that you're going to need to cultivate, even if you're not sick and on your deathbed, that you're going to need to cultivate this wisdom in order to be able to make your way to enlightenment. Because that's ultimately what he says, is he says, hey, if you can keep these 5 things in mind, then you can ultimately get to enlightenment. That's what he's talking about with the taintless liberation of mind. So these 5 things that he's talking about is reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body. What that helps you to do is be able to eliminate any kind of sexual cravings. If you have desire and longing, yearning for sex, then understanding the unattractiveness of the body can turn the mind away from that. And that's part of what you need to be able to ultimately get to enlightenment. Now, when or if you decide to move away from sex, it's your choice, but that's ultimately how you do it whenever you're ready to do it, is start to understand this unattractiveness of the physical body. Because we look at it as attractive, and that's why we're interested in having sex with it. But if you can think about the pus and the blood and the sinews and the saliva and the urine and the feces and all these kinds of things, this is going to help you to be able to turn away from that. When he talks about the perceiving dissatisfaction of food, by the time you get to enlightenment, you're going to know that food is enjoyable. You're going to know that it tastes wonderful, but you're not going to see it as something to take pleasure in, that you're not eating based on wanting pleasant feelings, but instead you're eating to be able to nourish the body. But that doesn't mean you don't ever have a piece of chocolate cake, or you don't ever, drink a nice smoothie with some sugar in it or something like that. You don't have to walk around eating, horrible food for the rest of your life. You just need to be able to get to the point where you've trained your mind that you don't have this central desire where you're forming your feelings based on the food. That way, no matter what food that you are actually experiencing, you can enjoy it, and you can be fine with this food. That these two together, reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body and understanding that food isn't to be delighted in, this is going to really help knock down your central desire. Because these are 2 really big central desires that we have, is interested in sexual contact and pleasing the mind through the tongue, through food. So the Buddha is talking here that you understand that this food is ultimately not going to lead to permanent satisfaction. So that's why you would be able to perceive the dissatisfaction of food. But you'll know that this food is enjoyable, and you might even have a preference for one type of food or another. But you can eat any and all foods by the time you get to enlightenment, and you'll be completely content and completely peaceful. Of course, if you have an allergy to a food and there be a medical issue, if you ate a particular food, you're not going to eat those kinds of foods. But in terms of all these other foods, you could eat any kind of food. You're not going to have where you long and yearn for one particular food versus another. You could taste any particular taste, whether it's bitter or sour or sweet or any number of other flavors like bland or something like this. You'd be able to have all of those flavors touch your tongue, and you wouldn't be getting conditioned pleasant feelings, and you wouldn't be getting painful ones either. Then perceiving non-excitement in the entire world. Again, as an enlightened being, you're going to have lots of fun in the world, and you're going to see that the world is way more enjoyable when your mind is actually enlightened. But you'll understand that these things aren't to be delighted in. So you might go to the movies with your friends, you might go to the park and really enjoy that, you might have great conversations, you might do any number of different things as you traverse the world, but you understand that these things aren't going to lead to permanent satisfaction. And that's what you would like to be able to get to, so that your mind can learn how to enjoy this thing, but not cling to it and hold on to it and want it to be permanent. The last one before the end is where you understand that all these things are impermanent. And that's why we need to be able to see the unattractiveness of the body, understand that food isn't to be delighted in, and that this world has things in it, yes, and we will enjoy those things, but we're not interested in getting conditioned pleasant feelings based on them because it's all impermanent, reflecting on all conditioned objects being impermanent. And then the perception of death is well established internally, meaning that you understand that this body is going to die, this being is going to die, and that's normal. And you don't have to be afraid of it, you don't have to be fearful of it, but you also don't need to crave it and long and yearn for it either. Not only your death, but the death of the beings around you, that all these beings are going to come and go and they're all going to die, including you. And you just need to be comfortable with that and just know that that's part of life and not be shying away from it. So the Buddha is talking about this in terms of someone who's sick and on their deathbed, and this is what's going to help them. But this is also going to help you during life to be able to get to enlightenment as well. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Looks like Marcy has a question. And remember, those of you on Facebook and YouTube, you can ask questions by putting that into the comment section.
Thank you, Teacher David. So I do enjoy making food. I made these roasted red potatoes with peppers and onions, and I had some left over, and I brought them out this morning, and I warmed them up on the stove. And as I was eating them, the mind noticed that they were kind of bland tasting. And instantaneously, the body stood up and went to the refrigerator and grabbed ketchup. I came back down. When I sat down to open up the ketchup, I noticed that there was a craving or a desire to change the taste of the potatoes, to take away the blandness. So instead of putting ketchup on my potatoes, I put the ketchup down, sat it there, and ate my potatoes. Is that a good practice to help diminish that this dissatisfaction, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food?
Yes. And you would like to do that multiple times until the mind has let go and you realize that you can be just as content eating these bland potatoes as any other time. And then ultimately, once you're convinced that the mind has let this go, that's where you might just choose to start using ketchup in the future because you just know that it tastes a bit better, right? So you don't have to do this permanently, but you need to do it for a certain period of time so that you can be sure that the mind isn't attached here to the ketchup. And this is how you do it, is wherever you see your mind potentially longing, yearning, even the little tiny bit, or even if you're not even sure if there's a craving there, it's like, all right, well, this ketchup isn't required in order for me to sustain life. Let me just try to eat these without the ketchup. And let me do this several times until you're convinced that no, the mind's no longer craving it, and you can be just as content eating those potatoes without the ketchup as with them.
Yeah, because that's you put it, you had it right out. You were so clear on that. It was like I wasn't sure if it was like really a craving or not, but yes, that was so clear. Thank you, teacher.
Yeah, and then also say you go 3, 4, 5 times without the ketchup, and now say you start using the ketchup again. Maybe you use that for 2 or 3 times. Then go back to the bland again and see how that goes for you, right? Because you would like to observe your mind with mindfulness and you'd like to introduce this impermanence. Don't just convince yourself because you ate it 3, 4, 5 times that it's completely gone. Go back to the ketchup. And now after you do that 3 or 4 or 5 times, see, does the mind cling to that by going back to the bland ones again? This is where it gets really fun and interesting because you're treating this mind like a third entity. The person, Marcy, is kind of looking at the mind as like, hey, I got something for you. You're going to eat some bland potatoes today. Boom, 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 boom. And then, oh, I got something for you. How about this ketchup? Oh, do you want to cling to that? Nope, not going to let you do that. Here's some bland potatoes again, right? So you kind of introduce this and kind of mix it up and almost kind of allow the mind to see, is it going to be discontent? Is it going to be frustrated? And if you notice any of that stuff, then you can stomp it out. The way that I think about it is like wringing out a rag and getting every last little drop out of the rag. The Buddha talks about it as cutting it off at the palm stump, obliterating it and destroying these fetters. And that's what you need to be able to do, is like kind of come at it in multiple angles like this and never really be fully convinced that the mind has eliminated any particular craving until you've seen a consistent long-term period where the mind is completely content in all of these different situations. Okay, let me see if we have anything else. All right, I'm not seeing anything else. So let's go to the next one. And here you guys can see I explain each one of these in detail for you. So here we go, chapter 25. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Keely, go ahead, ma'am.
Developing and cultivating 5 things. First discourse. Monks, if any male or female ordained practitioner develops and cultivates 5 things, one of 2 fruits is to be predicted, either final knowledge, wisdom in this very life, or if there is a residual remaining, the non-returner stage of enlightenment. What are the 5? Here, a monk has mindfulness well established internally for gaining the wisdom that discerns the arising and passing away of mental objects. He resides reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food, perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, and reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects. If any male or female ordained practitioner develops and cultivates these 5 things, one of 2 fruits is to be predicted, either final knowledge, wisdom in this very life, or there is a residual remaining, the non-returner stage of enlightenment. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So as we were just talking about on the last one, those 5 things I mentioned to you, that those are helpful for you to get to enlightenment as well in this life, not just on your deathbed, right? So 4 out of the 5 from the previous discourse are right here. These are the 4 out of the 5 that he was talking about. The one that's missing here is the perception of death. Well, the one that he's got in here now is he's talking about that one has mindfulness and wisdom of the arising and passing away of mental objects. What he's talking about here is what I teach in the August retreat, that you need to know each individual fetter, what they are, the symptoms of them, how to eliminate them, and how to know that they've actually been eliminated. That's what I teach you as part of that retreat for each individual fetter, because that's what the mental objects are. There's different ways that the Buddha uses the term mental objects, or at least what we're translating as mental objects. In about 80 or 90% of the cases, he's using this term mental objects to refer to the unwholesome qualities of the fetters, the 10 individual fetters. But there's some cases where he uses the word mental object, or at least what we're translating, as thinking or thoughts or ideas that are in the mind. And it could be wholesome or unwholesome. And we could even use this term mental objects related to wholesome qualities too, like loving kindness and compassion. Essentially, a mental object is a deeply rooted container in the mind, and most often we're referring to it as an unwholesome quality, like the sensual desire, like the ill will, like the conceit. All of these are mental objects. Every single one of the 10 fetters are mental objects. So here, what the Buddha is saying is, if you're interested in getting to enlightenment, that you're going to need to have awareness well established internally for the wisdom that you can know the arising and the passing away of the 10 fetters. That's what he's talking about here. And that's what you can gain throughout the entire program that I teach, all these different courses and retreats, and particularly the retreat in August that's titled Purification of the Mind. So that's what he's teaching here. But one other thing I would like to point out while we're on this discourse is here the Buddha is talking about if a male or female ordained practitioner develops and cultivates these 5 things, one of 2 fruits is being predicted, either final knowledge or wisdom, which that is enlightenment, or this 3rd stage of enlightenment, which is the non-returner, where you would basically be reborn into the heavenly realm and you get to enlightenment there. There's some people that you'll encounter, some books, some websites, some teachers that will tell you that females can't get to enlightenment, that you have to be a male and you have to be an ordained practitioner. This isn't actually true. And you can see it in the words of the Buddha here, and you can see it in other places too, where he talks about males and females both being able to get to enlightenment. And it doesn't have to be an ordained practitioner. There's places where he talks about anybody can get to enlightenment. So I just like to point these things out because these are common misunderstandings that you'll hear in the world, that some people say you have to be ordained or you have to be a male, and you can just see that this is really untrue, that there's nothing different about a mind of a male and a female. It's the same 10 fetters. It's the same craving, anger, and ignorance. It's the same tools and techniques to train it. It doesn't matter whether you have male sexual organs or female sexual organs. And it doesn't matter whether you wear an orange robe and you shave your hair, or whether you wear street clothes and you don't shave your hair, because that's essentially what a monk is doing. They're just living by a different protocol and a different lifestyle, and they have different clothing and they've shaved their head, right? But you can eliminate these fetters in the same way. It's just that you need to understand how to approach it and do that. So that's kind of another thing that you can glean from a discourse like this. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this one. This is where the Buddha is helping you to understand the 5 things to develop and cultivate to be able to get to enlightenment. And of course, there's other things that you're going to need to know and develop as well. Sometimes when people see a discourse like this, it's like, I got the discourse. This is the 5 things. I just need to do these 5 things. No, this is just one discourse of many. That is the Buddha explaining to you all the different things that you need in order to cultivate the mind. So you have to look at the teachings of the Buddha in their totality, that multiple discourses are giving you what you need. If this was all you needed, then the Buddha would just speak this and that's it. We wouldn't have 45 volumes of books. So let me know what questions you guys might have on this discourse. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So let's go to the next one, which is chapter 26, which is very similar to the one that we just saw and we actually just read. This is very, very similar. So this is actually what I was just saying, that the one where he's talking about when he's sick, that he's saying, okay, those same 5 things, the unattractiveness of the body, dissatisfaction in food, non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects, and the perception of death being well established, this is what leads to enlightenment. That's what he's saying here in chapter 26. So we just read this one, and he's just taking it away from not only when you're sick, but also at any other time too. These are the same things that are going to lead to enlightenment. So I think I saw Keely or somebody else that raised their hand. So let's see what the next one is. This is the 3rd discourse, chapter 27. So this is the same thing, those same 5 things, and he's saying that it leads to the destruction of the taints, which is the 10 fetters. So having the unattractiveness of the body, dissatisfaction of food, non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence of all conditioned objects, and the perception of death well established, this leads to destruction of the taints or the fetters, which is enlightenment, right? So this is just another way to say it. Okay, so now we'll just move on from here. And now let's see what we've got here. Okay, we've got some more detail here. So I didn't catch the person's hand who raised their hand, but if you would like to raise your hand again, you can read this one if you'd like. Okay, that was Leo. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you, David. Developing and cultivating 5 things. 4th discourse. Monks, these 5 things, when developed and cultivated, have liberation of mind as their fruit. Liberation of mind as their fruit and benefit. They have liberation by wisdom as their fruit. Liberation by wisdom as their fruit and benefit. What 5? Here, a monk resides reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body, receiving the dissatisfaction of food, receiving non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects, and he has the perception of death well established internally. These 5 things, when developed and cultivated, have liberation of mind as their fruit, liberation of mind as their fruit and benefit. They have liberation by wisdom as their fruit, liberation by wisdom as their fruit and benefit. When a monk is liberated in mind and liberated by wisdom, he is called a monk who has removed the crossbar, filled in the moat, pulled out the pillar, a bodiless one, a noble one, banner lowered, with burden dropped, unaffected. And how has a monk removed the crossbar? Here, a monk has abandoned ignorance, cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it so that it is no more subject to future rising. It is in this way that a monk has removed the crossbar. And how has the monk filled in the moat? Here, a monk has abandoned the wandering on in birth, and that brings renewed existence. He has cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it so it is no more subject to future rising. It is in this way that a monk has filled in the moat. And how has a monk pulled out the pillar? Here, a monk has abandoned craving, cut it off at the root, made it like a pawn stump, obliterated it so that it is no more subject to future rising. It is in this way that a monk has pulled out the pillar. Now is a monk a bodiless one? Here, a monk has abandoned the 5 lower fetters, cut them off at the root, made them like a pawn stump, obliterated them so that they are no more subject to future rising. It is in this way that a monk is a bodiless one. And how is a monk a noble one, with banner lowered, with burden dropped, unaffected? Here, a monk has abandoned the conceit, I am, cut it off at the root, made it like a pawn stump, obliterated it so that it is no more subject to future rising. It is in this way that a monk is the noble one, with banner lowered, with burden dropped, unaffected.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the Buddha is really great at using different analogies and kind of like stories to be able to kind of illustrate what it is that you're working towards. And this is where he's talking about like pulling out the crossbar and filling in the moat and these kinds of things. So this first part is all about what we've just been studying. He's talking about these 5 things, and he's saying these 5 things lead to enlightenment. And then he kind of talks about it in a way where he's relating it to a particular thing, right? The crossbar is like what's holding everything in place. If you pull out the crossbar, then everything collapses, right? So if you pull out ignorance out of the mind, then all of that discontentedness collapses, right? You dismantle dependent origination, which you guys are going to learn in the next book, volume 5. So pulling out the crossbar, or pulling out ignorance, is what's going to allow you to make your way towards enlightenment. So having removed the crossbar, everything collapses, all the discontentedness and the craving and the anger and everything. And then having done that, you've now filled in the moat, that there's not going to be continuous rebirth over and over and over again. And then the Buddha says you've pulled out the pillar. This is where you've abandoned craving, because if you abandon ignorance and you've arisen wisdom, now you can eliminate craving as well. And having obliterated that, you've pulled out the pillar, because this is what's holding everything up too. This is holding all the discontentedness up. It's holding this life up, that you're continuing to be reborn over and over and over again. And now there's this boltless one, that you're not bound any longer, that you've removed all the bolts, right? Because now if you've abandoned the lower fetters, the 5 lower fetters, now this individual is the boltless one. They're no longer holding on to the world in the same way, that they've eliminated a certain amount of the fetters. And then having eliminated the conceit, this is the Buddha saying that you've lowered the banner, right? The burden has been dropped, right? So if you think about waving this banner, like, look at me, look how great I am. Let me hold this flag up in the air and show everybody how great I am. And this is a real burden to carry around. And the Buddha is saying, okay, you've lowered your banner, that you've dropped this burden, you're unaffected, right? So this is really good analogies to be able to help you to realize, like, yeah, I'm not interested in raising my banner and showing how great and wonderful I am, because what you're looking to do is do just the opposite, is get rid of that conceit. So these kind of analogies can help you to understand what it is that you need to do, and you're not interested in going out there and bragging or being boastful, raising up your banner. So any questions here on this one? This is chapter 28. Okay, I don't see any questions, so we'll go to chapter 29. Now we're getting into right intention here. Would someone like to read this one? Okay, it looks like Yihang and then Marcy afterwards.
Thank you, Teacher David. One who is constantly dedicated. But monks, if a sensual thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while walking, and he does not tolerate it, but abandons it, dispels it, terminates it, and obliterates it, then that monk is said to be dedicated and to have moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously energetic, and determined while walking. If a sensual thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while standing, and he does not tolerate it, but abandons it, dispels it, terminates it, and obliterates it, then that monk is said to be dedicated and to have moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously energetic and determined while standing. If a central thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while sitting, and he does not tolerate it, but abandons it, dispels it, terminates it, and obliterates it, then that monk is said to be dedicated and to have moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously energetic and determined while sitting. If a central thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while wakefully lying down, and he does not tolerate it, but abandons it, dispels it, terminates it, and obliterates it, then that monk is said to be dedicated and to have moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously energetic and determined while wakefully lying down. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Yihang. So here the Buddha is talking about this dedication, that you don't allow these thoughts to continue in the mind, because any kind of speech or actions that you have, it's going to come from your thoughts. It's going to come from the mind. So if you can be so dedicated that while you're walking, standing, sitting, or lying down and kind of, falling asleep or waking up, then if you notice a thought at any point during your day, that's essentially what he's talking about. At any point during your day, if you notice a central thought, meaning a thought of central desire, or a thought of ill will, like anger, hatred, ill will, frustration, agitation, annoyance, or a thought of harming, where you're interested in harming another being, the Buddha says don't tolerate that. You'd like to cut it off and let it go, terminate it, dispel it, obliterate it. And now you're being dedicated to this moral concern of wrongdoing. What this is that you have the wisdom of what's wise and unwise, and you're concerned about doing things that are unwise. Because if you understand the natural law of karma very closely, you can see that anytime you make unwise decisions, that it's going to produce unwholesome results. And you're not interested in continuing to experience those unwholesome results. So by having this moral concern of wrongdoing, you're not interested in allowing these thoughts to invade the mind, because as long as you allow these thoughts to continue to persist in the mind, it's going to lead to speech or actions that you're going to regret later. Because when you do those things, whether through your speech or actions, and you're causing harm to other beings, now this harm is going to come back to you. So you would like to cut it off at the thoughts, whether you have a central thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming. Cut that off and let it go, so that the mind doesn't dwell in that, because that's what's going to produce the action of either verbal action or the bodily actions. So you need to catch it as a mental aspect of the mind, this thought in the mind, and that's where you can really transform the mind. And this would be being dedicated all throughout your day, from the moment you first start waking up all day long until you're starting to fall asleep in the evening. Pay attention to the mind with your mindfulness, and don't allow these thoughts to persist. So it looks like Marcy has a question here. If anyone else has a question, just let me know.
Yes, thank you, Teacher David. So the mind is experiencing a conflict. So as you know, I care for animals, and animals, especially dogs and cats, will eat other animals in order to survive in the wild. So I have been feeding them dog food that's made from living beings, beef liver, beef, salmon, all kinds of things. I am now, conservative on the cost of living and the cost of it, and it has come to realization that by making their food myself, it would be more cost effective. It'd take a little bit more time, but it would be more cost effective financially to provide them with the most nutritious food for them. By making this dog food for them, there will be purchasing of animal products. And the mind is seeming to be very conflicted about this, because by buying the animal flesh, isn't that dealing in meats?
It's not a livelihood, because that's what the Buddha teaches you, is to not have a livelihood where you're having business in meats. But you are making an action, you're making a decision through actions that is leading to the harm of another being. And this is where you would like to refine your practice if you're able to, because there's some animals that can live off of plant-based food. And this is one of the challenges about assuming the responsibility of taking care of another being, that you're now making decisions for that being. And those beings probably have sensual desire, though they definitely have sensual desire, but they have sensual desire through the tongue. And now you might find it kind of challenging to switch them over to maybe a plant-based diet, and maybe it might even not be cost effective for you. So this is where I know your plans are to kind of like slowly allow your herd to kind of wean out and then not replace them with any other beings. And this would be wise, because then you won't find yourself in a situation where you're making these choices.
Okay. So in that, there is some kind of unwholesome karma that I would be generating for this being, Marcy, by proceeding to purchase animal flesh to make their dog food.
Yeah, what you're generating here, the answer is yes. And what you're experiencing here is that, you're allowing the continuation of killing of animals, which that then leads to the destruction of our environment. And then as you have this animal flesh and products in your home, there can sometimes be bacteria and diseases that are affecting you in that way. So this is like the direct result of the decision that you're making. Whereas if you didn't make that decision, then there would be less harm in the world, so there wouldn't be as much of an impact to the environment, and you wouldn't have the likelihood of getting diseases through the meat that you're purchasing. So this is the karma that you're experiencing because of that.
Would it be, so I guess it's going to come down to me making a choice of whether I want to continue to purchase already pre-made dog food, or if I want to assume the karma that will come along with making their own dog food at this point.
Yeah, you have to look at that and decide for yourself. Even the pre-made dog food, I mean, it's better, like if you had a choice, but you also have to balance that with your finances, right? So that's where you're kind of like have to really look at this, where you might have to be like, yeah, I'm going to kind of like take one on the chin, so to speak, and I know that I'm doing this, but it's just temporary. It's the next 5 years or the next 10 years until this pack kind of thins out, and this is what you're going to do, and this is what you need to do for your finances. So you're going to have to look at that and decide, like, where's my kind of cost benefit here of where am I going to be experiencing the least amount of karma. Because if you spend a lot of money on dog food and you don't have money for yourself, you're going to experience karma there too. So you've got to look at this and decide. Here in Thailand, one of the things they do is they feed their animals rice. I don't know if your animals will eat that, but you might be able to slowly get them to eat that, because that's very inexpensive and it's very filling. And this could be something that they might be able to eat if you decide to start feeding it to them.
Okay. Yeah. So I have done rice before in the past, but my elderly dog has somewhat of an allergy to it, so it causes him discomfort. So I was trying to steer away from that. And according to the vets, it's better for them to eat about a 60% of meat as their diet versus any kind of like carbohydrates like that. So I was just trying to find that balance where I was able to provide for them a nutritious meal that wasn't breaking the bank. And I was trying to minimize the amount of harm that I put out in the world. So that's kind of what I'm trying to balance out.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges of having to care for another being like this, that you're now in a decision-making position to make decisions for these other beings. And now your decisions are going to produce karma for you. Whereas if, I don't suggest you do this, but let's just say they were out in the woods and they were living their own life, they're making their own decisions and you're not making those decisions for them, and now you're not experiencing any karma because of those decisions.
Yeah. Thank you, Teacher David. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so you just have to look at it closer, and your decision to thin things out, I think, is really wise for you. Okay, so it looks like Vibhav, you have a question?
Yes, David, my question is similar to Marcy's, but relates to the family. So my kids eat meat. I don't, and I stopped eating it. And so, but I'm purchasing meat for them, I guess. Is even though I'm not directly eating it, but because I'm purchasing it, is it still affecting my karma? Or
Yeah, so in this situation, your children are making the decision to eat meat. What you're doing is you're practicing generosity. And now, by you choosing to purchase the meat, they would have purchased it by themselves regardless. But the gamma that you're experiencing here is that you're practicing generosity. So, of course, your children are going to be appreciative of that. But just like with Marcy, by having meat in the house, there can be bacterias and viruses and things like this that you pick up. Whereas if that wasn't in the house, you wouldn't experience that. But these are decisions that your children are making, and you're practicing generosity in that situation.
okay, so but it's not like because I'm buying the meat, I'm basically what's that word? I'm supporting the killing of animals, right? In one way.
Well, if you didn't purchase it, your wife would purchase it, right? Or your children would end up purchasing it. So it's their decision. You're just practicing the generosity to be able to bring it to them. So in this situation, it's a little bit different than with the animals, because the animals, they're not making the decision here. Marcy's making the decision 100%, where in your situation, the decision that you're choosing to make is practicing generosity. Whereas if you went to the market and you bought all vegetables and you didn't get the things that your family needed, now you're going to experience the gamma of that, where now it's like you're not providing the subsistence that your family needs in order to survive. So that's going to be unwholesome gamma for you. So in this situation, you can see that it's producing wholesome gamma because you're practicing generosity. But ultimately, they're the ones who are experiencing the unwholesome gamma because they're ingesting the meat. And yes, you still have that gamma of you're with beings who do eat meat, so you can experience the illness of bacterias and things like this, but this is very minimal compared to actually ingesting the meat.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I don't see any other questions anywhere. So this next chapter is essentially exactly the same thing that we just studied, but the Buddha is talking about complacency. That if you're either sitting, standing, walking, or wakefully lying down, and you tolerate a thought of sensual desire, ill will, or harming, and you allow it to be there, and you do not abandon it, you do not terminate it, you don't obliterate it, then this person is said to be lacking of effort and moral wrongdoing, moral concern of wrongdoing. And this person is now continuously complacent. This is where you guys have heard me share before when we talk about complacency, that the Buddha describes complacency all the way to the point is if you're walking down the street and there's a thought of sensual desire or a thought of ill will or a thought of harming that comes into the mind and you do nothing about it, then your mind's complacent. Right? So that's the same thing like we were talking about Yihang at the beginning, where that pleasant feeling is arising and the mind does nothing about it. It just kind of indulges in it a little bit. That's the complacency that the Buddha is describing here. So it's the same exact thing, just the first time it's worded as dedication because you're actually taking action to eliminate the thoughts, where here this is complacency if someone tolerates it and doesn't actually apply effort to eliminate it. Okay, so I don't think you guys probably have questions there. And now the very last chapter for today. Looks like Marcy's volunteering for that one. If you'd like to go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. 4 modes of practice for the destruction of the taints. Monks, there are these 4 modes of practice. What for? Practice that is painful with sluggish direct knowledge experience. Practice that is painful with quick direct knowledge experience. Practice that is pleasant with sluggish direct knowledge experience. And practice that is pleasant with quick direct knowledge experience. Painful mode with sluggish direct knowledge experience. Here, a monk resides reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food, perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects, and he has the perception of death well established internally. He resides depending upon these 5 trainee powers: the power of confidence, the power of moral wrongdoing, the power of moral concern, the power of energy, the power of wisdom. These 5 faculties arise in him without strength: the faculty of confidence, the faculty of energy, the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of concentration, and the faculty of wisdom. Because of these 5 faculties are without strength, he sluggishly attains the immediate condition for the destruction of the taints. This is called practice that is painful with sluggish direct knowledge experience. Painful mode with quick direct knowledge experience. Here, a monk resides reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food, perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects, and he has the perception of death well established internally. He resides depending upon these 5 training powers: the power of confidence, the power of moral wrongdoing, the power of moral concern, the power of energy, and the power of wisdom. These 5 faculties arise in him with strength: the faculties of confidence, the faculties of energy, the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of concentration, and the faculty of wisdom. Because these 5 faculties are strong, he quickly attains the immediate condition for the destruction of the taints. This is called practice that is painful with quick direct knowledge experience. Pleasant mode with sluggish direct knowledge experience. Here, distant from sensual pleasure, distant from unwholesome states, a monk enters and resides in the 1st jhana, the 2nd jhana, the 3rd jhana, the 4th jhana. He resides depending on these 5 training powers: the power of confidence, the power of moral wrongdoing, the power of moral concern, the power of energy, and the power of wisdom. These 5 faculties arise in him without strength: the faculties of confidence, the faculties of energy, the faculties of mindfulness, the faculties of concentration, and the faculty of wisdom. Because these 5 faculties are without strength, he sluggishly attains the immediate condition for the destruction of these taints. This is called practice that is pleasant with sluggish direct knowledge experience. Pleasant mode with quick direct knowledge experience. Here, distant from sensual pleasure, distant from unwholesome states, a monk enters and resides in the 1st jhana, the 2nd jhana, the 3rd jhana, and the 4th jhana. He resides depending on these 5 training powers: the power of confidence, the power of moral wrongdoing, the power of moral concern, the power of energy, the power of wisdom. These 5 faculties arise in him with strength: the faculties of confidence, the faculties of energy, the faculties of mindfulness, the faculty of concentration, and the faculty of wisdom. Because these 5 faculties are strong, he quickly attains the immediate condition for the destruction of the taints. This is called practice that is pleasant with quick direct knowledge experience. These monks are the 4 modes of practice.
Okay. Thank you, Marcy.
Powerful.
Yeah, so there's these 4 methods that the Buddha is describing of getting to enlightenment, and he's talking about painful methods and pleasant methods and quick direct knowledge or sluggish direct knowledge. Well, getting to enlightenment, it's not, just peachy keen and, everything's wonderful and it's going to be so pleasant all the way to enlightenment. When you're letting go of craving, desire, attachment, it's painful because the mind's not getting what it wants. You're going to experience painful feelings. You're going to have to walk through the fire in order to appreciate the fresh air on the other side. The way that I think about it is it's like getting into the mafia. I've never been in the mafia, but I can only know from things that I've seen on TV that maybe when you get into the mafia, wow, there's so much pleasure. You've got all these new friends, you've got all this power, you've got maybe money and things like this that are coming your way and lots of other pleasures. But if you would like to get out of the mafia, it's going to be painful, right? And it's the same thing. When you get into craving, it can be really pleasant that you're getting all these conditioned pleasant feelings. But now when you start peeling away from that and your mind's not getting what it wants, when it's not getting that beer, when it's not getting that chocolate cake, when it's not getting that ketchup on your potatoes, it can sometimes be painful, right? Depending on how deeply the mind is craving and holding on to a particular thing. So as your mind's not getting what it wants, it's going to start having these painful feelings. But the more you peel away from that and you get rid of that craving, then that's where the peace and the joy comes in. So what I like to do with these kinds of things is like, okay, the Buddha's giving us all this guidance about all these different methods and modes of being able to get to enlightenment. But of course, This is the one that everybody would like to know about, right? The pleasant mode with quick, direct knowledge. That's what everybody's maybe interested in. So I like to focus on these. While it's helpful to understand the other ones, this is the one that you would probably be interested in, right? So you would like to be able to cultivate these 5 trainee powers: the power of confidence, moral wrongdoing, moral concern, energy, and wisdom. So you need to know what these things are. The power of confidence, that's the confidence in the Buddha, right? That's whenever you see confidence, that's what it means. It means that you're without doubt, right? And you have doubt when you first come to the path, but ultimately, as you get rid of your doubt, you're going to have this confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, and the community, your teacher, and your own ability to get to enlightenment. When you have confidence, this is a real power. It's like, hey, I can do this. I have confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, my teacher, my own ability to get to enlightenment. These teachings have been around for 2,500 years for a reason. The Buddha left the royal riches for a reason because of this mind. My teacher David has done what he's done in order to share these teachings. Wow, okay, there's enlightened mental state must be something worthwhile. So you can build this confidence more and more, even in your own ability to get to enlightenment, because you can see that your mind's headed in that direction. Then you'd like to have the power of moral wrongdoing. This is where you understand what is wise and unwise, that you're knowing the wise decisions in the world and the unwise decisions, and you cultivate that through your wisdom. And then you have moral concern, where you're disinterested in causing harm to others, that you understand that any wrongdoing that you do when you make unwise decisions is going to cause harm, and this harm is going to come back to you. So you would like to have this moral wrongdoing where you know what's wise and unwise, and you have moral concern where you're disinterested in causing harm to others, and you're concerned about any kind of harm that you may cause. Then you like to have the energy. This is the enlightenment factor of energy, where you have a willingness to do something, initiative, ambition, enthusiasm, this vigor in the mind. And then there's this power of wisdom, that you cultivated the wisdom. That's not just like, yeah, let me read that book. Yeah, let me come to class and just kind of like be surfing the internet while the teacher's talking or while we're reading. Yeah. You're not doing that. You're having this energy to then cultivate this wisdom and be able to see the truth for yourself through listening to the teachings with eager ears, through reflecting on them, and through practicing them. You cultivate more and more wisdom. So these are the 5 trainee powers that's going to make it more pleasant and more quick or direct for you to be able to get to enlightenment. Then as you've cultivated those, then you have the faculty of confidence, meaning you can practice this confidence, that you have this strength of energy, that you have this willingness to do something. Then you've cultivated your mindfulness or awareness of mind. You've cultivated the concentration or the focus or singleness of mind, and you've got this faculty of wisdom. And now this is going to lead to you getting to the point where you can eliminate those fetters more readily than if you didn't have these things. And all the work that you do on the Eightfold Path is what's leading you to these jhanas. So getting into the jhanas and then having cultivated these things, this is what's going to lead to you being able to move through the 4 stages of enlightenment more pleasantly. But it can be somewhat painful in certain situations. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular chapter. We can talk about these other modes if you'd like to, but I imagine you're not really interested in any of these modes other than to know that, whoa, I'm doing this the slow way, the sluggish way, the painful way. Let me get away from this and let me get to the pleasant and the way that's the more direct route. So any questions, you can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. Okay, so this was the end of Volume 4. This was Chapter 31. We're now complete with Volume 4. We've done all 4 books of the book series, Volumes 2, 3, and 4, and you guys have already studied Volume 1. So we're moving into Volume 5. We're going to do all 13 volumes, from Volume 2 all the way up to 13 throughout this program. And we started in July. But if you're just joining now for the first time, if maybe you're on YouTube or Facebook, it's okay. You can actually join this program at any point. We're going to be moving into Volume 5, Chapters 1 through 10. And you can get this through downloading it from our website at buddhadailywisdom.com. You can take it and go print it. You can get printed versions at our temple here, or you can order it on Amazon. So by reading the chapters before or after class, this is going to produce the most benefit. Because as you guys saw, there's the words of the Buddha, but then you've got words from me to help you, and you've got the references as well. So we're going to move into this next book. And now that you guys have had kind of a little bit of a foundation in learning and studying with the original words of the Buddha, you're going to see that we're going to get into some really penetrating teachings. From this point forward, you're going to see that now you've kind of got a foundation of having studied this. It's kind of like you've been friends with the Buddha for a while, you've been talking to him for a while, you're kind of used to the way he talks and he speaks, and now he's going to go into a whole lot more details through the rest of the volumes. It's going to really penetrate deep down into the teachings that he shares. So these first 3 books of Volume 2, 3, and 4, it really kind of preps the mind for deeper study of the words of the Buddha in all the different volumes. It looks like Marcy might have a question on something I just shared. Go ahead, Marcy.
Yes, thank you, Teacher David. I do apologize. It's actually not about particularly what you just shared, but it is about what the last reading was. The mind at one point was really craving to understand what jhana it may be residing in. And I have recently started to train the mind to just let that go. Is it more beneficial to know where the mind resides, or is it more beneficial to let it go because there's a craving involved?
Both. You're gonna need to let it go, but you also would like to know what the jhanas are, so you can just confirm for yourself that you're moving through them, because this helps you to eliminate doubt. When you actually see the words of the Buddha where he's describing these jhanas, and you know he described them 2,500 years ago, and here you are looking at ink on a page that's describing what he talked about, and you're experiencing those exact qualities that he's talking about, this really helps you to get over a doubt, and you'll know with 100% certainty that this individual lived and his teachings are producing exactly what he said. But you're not interested in craving these things and being obsessed about them. So if you need to go away from it for a period of time in order to allow your mind to eliminate the craving, that's fine. But then at some point you would like to study the jhanas, so you can just see like, yep, I experienced that. Yep, I experienced that. Yep, I experienced that. Yep. And as long as you confirm all of that, whether you're in jhana, the second jhana or the third jhana, it doesn't really matter 100%, because you're going to make your way through all those jhanas and you're going to experience all those qualities. But getting obsessed over exactly what jhana you're in, that's not beneficial for you at all. But just knowing what the jhanas are and that your mind is moving through them, that's beneficial without craving, desire, attachment.
I appreciate that. Teacher David, which volume book would you recommend for someone to go to be able to read about the jhanas? What is the best book? Is it volume 1?
I haven't really written about the jhanas anywhere very much. The volume 1 has the words of the Buddha of the jhanas. So if you go to chapter 5, where he talks about the Eightfold Path under right concentration, you'll see his words there. That's where he's describing them. And that's the most detail that he really gives about the jhanas too, other than kind of like certain things you'll experience, like blindfolding Mara and things like this. But there's a course that I teach where there's a class that I teach about the jhanas. And in that class, that would be helpful for you to take, because I dissect each individual jhana and explain what it is. And I have consolidated the words of the Buddha on the jhanas, where I show you about maybe 6 or 8 or 10 different discourses where the Buddha is talking about the jhanas. So you would like to be able to get that class. It's been recorded multiple times, so you can listen to it and you can learn and let me know what questions you have.
All right. Thank you very much, Teacher David. It was lovely to see everyone today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Pleased to help you. Okay, so next week we'll be in chapters 1 through 10 of volume 5. You guys are welcome to read those before or after class. Tomorrow in our group learning program, we're going to be in volume 1, chapter 2. This is titled Why Study the Teachings of Gotama Buddha. if you would like to attend that, I usually do that as a discussion. I'll be teaching a little bit, but it's more of a time to interact with each other and kind of meet members of the community. You guys can even talk and kind of talk about some of the benefits that you're noticing, because some of the newer students will be able to hear that and they'll be, kind of encouraged by that. If they know somebody's been studying for a year or two or even 6 months or 3 months and they notice a certain amount of benefits, that can be really helpful to describe at that time, because we'll just kind of open up our mics and just kind of have a nice discussion as part of our class tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be doing the third part of our loving kindness meditation series, where I'm doing a 4-part series where I'm going to be doing loving kindness meditation with students and then opening up to any and all questions that you guys have. So thank you all for everything that you're doing to learn and practice the teachings and support the teachings to be able to share with others. So perhaps I'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Sawadee-ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.